here is a question. What would you say is a drug trafficker's biggest dream?
Plomo, plomo, plomo. Pa, 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 pa. Droga, sexo pornográfico.
Alright, allow me to explain myself, because we all have dreams, you, me, politicians, and of course, drug traffickers. They are no exception, they are people too. Though it may be hard to believe, in the heart of the ruthless and cruel drug trafficking industry, there are human beings with names, and in this case also nicknames, who, just like everyone else, have dreams. So let's go back to my original question. What is the biggest dream that a drug trafficker could have? I mean, of course there might be different possible answers because we're all individuals, but unfortunately history tells us that if most drug traffickers could make a wish, just one single wish, it would be to turn their country into a narco-state. That is to say, they would turn them into states run by a kind of criminal corporation made up of politicians, public officials, judges, the police, and the military, which in one way or another were associated with drugs. That way, drug traffickers could basically act with impunity, exporting and distributing narcotics without any restrictions. Very recently here on VisualPolitik, we spoke about how the Bolivarian regime of Nicolas Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, and the Cartel de los Soles was turning Venezuela into a narco-state. However, in Latin America, narcopolitics, it goes far beyond Venezuela. In this video, we're going to find out a bit more about one character who was able to promote the alliance between the narcotics industry and politicians, so listen up.
Mis mejores amigos están en la comunidad de los Tugurios, en el basurero municipal.
Narco-populism.
We all know it. The narcotics industry is one of the most important illegal businesses. Every year it moves several $100 billion. Now allow me to ask another question. Do you think that a cartel can survive without political support? Can they survive without controlling the institutions in some way? To answer this question, let's go back to the beginning and take a look at how the most important drug dealers of all time managed to do it. Because even though it's true that in the beginning drug traffickers started out as little more than a band of outlaws, the time came when this all changed. A time came, and so did a protagonist. Pablo Escobar Gaviria, considered by Forbes magazine to be one of the richest men of his time on the entire planet. According to Forbes, in 1987, Pablo Escobar had a fortune that exceeded $2 billion. And Escobar, he radically changed the global drug industry. See, on the one hand, he created an entire network, a criminal holding company that included businesses like extortion, kidnapping, murder, and of course their main activity of drug trafficking. All these activities were perfectly integrated into a structure, the Medellin cartel, which had a clear organizational chart, a well-defined hierarchy, and even a zone-based distribution network, each with its own managers. Talking in business speak, these were sort of like franchises or branches. On the other hand, regarding his main business, drugs, this cartel, the Medellin cartel, achieved an almost complete vertical integration. That is, the cartel took over the harvest, the production, the distribution, and the marketing of the vast majority of its merchandise. They did everything, and they took over every single stage of the business. That's how the Medellin cartel managed to bring in more than $7 billion per year. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the complicity of the public authorities.
Apparently, Escobar reached the top of the cocaine cartel by astutely reinvesting his initial earnings and becoming a PR master in Colombia. With his growing wealth, Escobar bought a newspaper in Medellin, gained influence in Colombian politics, and he successfully ran for public office, becoming an alternative to the National Congress. David Henry, Forbes magazine, 1987.
You see, for many years, Pablo Escobar had impunity. With his money and threats, the well-known phrase of silver or lead, he managed to infiltrate the Colombian state. He bribed the military, politicians, governors, and the police in such a way that many Colombian institutions were under his command for a long time. And that's not all. Pablo Escobar also financed electoral campaigns to win popular support. And what does a politician do when he wants to gain popularity fast? Well, he promoted projects like the building of houses for the nation's poorest citizens, as well as distributing provisions and creating soccer fields. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, at first glance, kind of like a Colombian Robin Hood. Too bad the truth was rather different. While he was carrying out this type of campaign, he had no qualms about flooding the streets with violence and blood. Welcome to narco-populism. As you all probably know, Pablo Escobar managed to hold a seat in the Colombian parliament in 1982. Until then, thanks to his political influence and his PR strategies, he was able to build his empire and his huge fortune with the utmost impunity.
A member of the United States Drug Enforcement Agency once said that importing exotic animals for his zoo caused Escobar more problems with the government than his drug business. David Henry.
Now, hold on just a second. Don't think that Pablo Escobar's political relations were limited to Colombia. Not at all. You see, after being elected as a deputy, the situation became untenable. Some members of the media began telling the truth behind his fortune, the DEA's pressure multiplied, and a lot of Colombian society understood the huge danger that Pablo Escobar posed, and other cartels, they began to fear the power that the Medellin cartel would grow into. That's when the government began to persecute this capo, which in a way declared war on the Colombian state itself. And just to be safe, the first thing Escobar did was leave the country, lest he be hunted down.
The Leap.
So, Pablo Escobar put some space between himself and Colombia. The question is, where could he find refuge? Would his drug money be enough to strengthen his alliances? Well, it seems absolutely so. First of all, there was Panama. At that time, the military dictator Manuel Antonio Noriega offered him asylum, protection, and a route to transport his merchandise. So imagine, this industry was so powerful that even dictators were willing to sell their services. The fact is that, as you can see, Noriega also turned Panama into a narco-state. That is, until 1989, when a lightning invasion by the United States removed him from power. He was detained, taken to the United States, and given 30 years in prison for his drug trafficking and his relationship with the Medellin cartel. But this is not the end of Pablo Escobar's external alliances. The truth is that he didn't feel very safe in Panama either. I mean, yes, the dictator of the country was his pal, but the CIA had a very large presence in the country, so when he least expected it, Noriega could be tempted to sell him out. Because, of course, it was one thing to do business with a Panamanian dictator and quite another to entrust him with his protection. He needed to find a new destination. So, through the left-wing Colombian guerrilla movement, M19, Pablo Escobar contacted the Nicaraguan government. At that moment, the Sandinista government board, led by the country's current president, Daniel Ortega, was willing to welcome him with open arms in exchange for a commission, for services rendered. The agreement specified that in addition to settling in the country with his family, Pablo could use some of Nicaragua's regions as a drug distribution platform. The problem? Ortega and his friends, they were very greedy, so a few months later, Pablo decided to return to Colombia, but of course, he maintained his business relations. But there's more. Along with Nicaragua, the M19 guerrillas also facilitated the Medellin cartel's contact with the Cuban government. Yeah, that's right. Cuba was also a trading platform for Pablo Escobar's businesses. In fact, it is known that Pablo Escobar maintained good relations with the Castro brothers. Although, truthfully, it seems that he wasn't the only one. All evidence indicates that after Escobar, other drug dealers continued to use Cuba, through the Castros, to introduce all types of narcotics into the United States. Anyway, Colombia, Panama, Nicaragua, Cuba, as you can see, political power was one of the main drivers of the huge presence of drug trafficking in Latin America. The lack of transparency, the corruption, lack of counterweights, and weak institutions were a perfect breeding ground for what, over the years, became one of the great nightmares of this region. And yes, some of you might now be thinking, well, alright Simon, but in the end, Pablo Escobar, he fell from power. And yeah, it's true, but when a man like Escobar falls, it doesn't mean that the industry falls, and nor do their relations with political power. Let's have a look at Mexico.
The Relay.
The main Mexican cartel with which Pablo Escobar had a relationship was the Guadalajara cartel, led by Ernesto Fonseca, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. This cartel had full impunity for 2 decades, all thanks to their relations with people in power. See, Felix Gallardo was in charge of public relations, and thanks to his ability to move within the highest political spheres, this cartel had all the stability it needed to develop and grow. PR is really important. However, we're talking about a criminal industry, and in criminal organizations, stability is very hard to achieve. In this case, the assault on the DEA agent Enrique Camarena, which ended his life, made Washington demand the dismantling of this cartel, and its leaders fell one by one. But this didn't end the business. From prison in 1989, Felix Gallardo tried to reorganize the territories, but in the absence of an agreement, the cartel it split in two. The Tijuana cartel, led by the Arellano brothers, and the Sinaloa cartel, led by Hector Luis Palma Salazar, El Guerrero Palma, and Joaquin Guzman Lorea, aka El Chapo. They both debuted on the Forbes list in 2009 with an estimated fortune of more than $1 billion. The fact is that under El Chapo's command, the Sinaloa cartel became the most important and influential cartel in Mexico and one of the most important criminal organizations in the world. The question that many of you might be asking now is, how did he do it? How can one cartel grow so much more than its adversaries? Well, above all, it's because of political influences. For example, how do you prevent the federal police from catching you and dismantling your business? Well, you would do that by finding out when those raids are going to happen. Everything is based on good relations, and that's precisely what El Chapo made sure that he would have: information and friends, a power. And as we've seen in other cases, El Chapo's capture, it didn't really change the panorama. Today, the Sinaloa cartel is controlled by Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who over the years has been known to buy officials from the Special Prosecutor's Office, the Attorney General's Office, and even the Counter-Narcotics Intelligence Center, an elite army corps created to fight narcotics.
Obviously, they don't do these businesses alone. In many cases, they have the approval or participation of the authorities. FJR researcher at the University of Guadalajara.
This is all done in complicity with senior government officials. Only that explains these criminal groups' power, strength, and resilience. We're talking about a political power with which, in many cases, narcos create a symbiosis that is hard to distinguish. That's what's happening in Venezuela with the Soles Cartel, of which we've already spoken here on VisualPolitik. And watch out, because it's estimated that the Mexican and Venezuelan cartels control 70% of all drugs that enter the United States. That's what happens in countries like Guatemala, where some sources state that up to 80% of all the white powder could be mediated by members of the National Army itself. Or what's happening in Honduras, where even the son of former President Porfirio Lobo has been condemned in the United States for drug trafficking activities, while his own father was president of the republic. Anyway, folks, that is the result of having weak institutions, a lack of transparency, and a lack of counterweights. In future videos, we're going to talk more about this issue, which is becoming very expensive for Latin American countries. With this video, we just wanted to show you a few examples of how some of the great narcos succeeded, largely thanks to their influence on established institutions. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please do consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.